Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of the Moynihan Report. I, of course, am your host, Michael Moynihan. And importantly, the most important thing is that our show today is brought to us, to you, by the only principled people I seem to know in America anymore, and that is the good people at FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. It used to be education, but they got bigger. So they're an organization dedicated to the promotion of free speech and the legal defense, importantly, the legal defense of those whose free speech rights are being abrogated. So donate. If you have money, donate. That's the best thing, right? But if you go to thefire.org/Moynihan, that is the most important part, because then they keep, they keep with the show. Then you can get the newsletter and find out what is going on in the atrocious world of people's speech being screwed with. And, by the way, quick point on this is that there were a lot of people who were great on free speech in the past, 3-4 years. And I knew them, and we did shows together. And some of them, I'm not going to name names, but you could probably ask ChatGPT or Grok, and you'll find out who they are, because they're not so good anymore. But there's a lot going on in the world, and typically we have someone sitting across from us in the seat. But it was important to me today to get the right guests for this insane news cycle. It's not, you know what, we're just going to call it the news cycle. Because everything is completely nuts now. And what is the thing that all of you know about? I'm going to assume, by the way, if you're watching the show, that I don't need to do the background on the whole Signal controversy, right? Should I do the abridged one? All right. Don't send stuff on Signal if you're the Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, and you're about to launch an attack on a foreign country. That happened. But if you look at the conservative media right now, this is actually pretty interesting. What used to be the conservative media in the Trump world, they don't like them. But National Review is one magazine, used to be the gold standard, Bill Buckley's magazine, and the Wall Street Journal, both with editorials out saying, guys, you screwed this up royally, and you're taking a 1-2 day story and making it a week story. I try not to pay attention to cable news because it gives me heart palpitations and makes me very upset. But I got to do the show, so there's a lot of material there. So I was trying to figure out, wait, what are they doing that is perpetuating this already insane story? And the first thing I hit upon was Mike Waltz, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who is the one that invited, according to a screenshot, I'm just saying, it looks like he was the one that invited Jeffrey Goldberg onto this chat about how they were just going to blow some stuff up in Yemen. Mike Waltz was called on to Fox News because you don't do any news but your friend's news now, so it's going to be on Fox News. And Laura Ingraham, the host, asks him, what the hell happened?
Laura, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but of all the people out there, somehow this guy who has lied about the president, who has lied to Gold Star families, lied to their attorneys, and gone to Russia hoax, gone to just all kinds of links to lie and smear the president of the United States. And he's the one that somehow gets on somebody's contact and then gets sucked into this group. Somebody else's number on someone else's contact. So, of course, I didn't see this loser in the group. It looked like someone else. Now, whether he did it deliberately or it happened in some other technical mean is something we're trying to figure out.
So you note, by the way, that Mike Waltz, to be in Trump world, you have to call Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, a loser in the middle of this. And as you all know, if any of your friends start a sentence with, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, they're about to be a conspiracy theorist. So apparently Jeff Goldberg, God knows how this happened, is not only a loser, but he's a very good hacker. And this was what they came out with. The phone was compromised. It's like, no, you're a dope. And you added him to the chat and just own it. Now, Carolyn Levitt, the White House press secretary, is on Jesse Waters' show, also, of course, on Fox, right after this, a couple hours after this. And this is the exchange between Jesse Waters and White House press secretary Caroline Levitt.
So it's kind of strange that, of all people, Jeffrey Goldberg entered this chat. Could have been an accident on your team's side, but it also could have been something a little more mischievous on Goldberg's side, as you heard Walt say. What do you think about this character?
It certainly could have been more mischievous, as Mike Waltz alluded to in the previous hour. We are working very hard to find out how this number was inadvertently added to the group chat. It remains a mystery, but we hope that soon it will be solved. And as you heard from the National Security Advisor, Elon Musk's team of experts are looking at this. The White House counsel's office and the National Security Council are all digging into this matter.
It's a mystery. It's a huge mystery, so much so that they've got Hercule Poirot coming to D.C. to figure out what happened. He added him to the chat by mistake. No one was fucking hacked. Like this, the other favorite thing is that Elon Musk, he's the smart guy, so we called him. Is he like a forensics guy on phones? This amazing ability of the White House to not just own this, just say we made a mistake. I actually am not somebody who thinks it's the biggest thing in the world, but this response is shambolic, it's embarrassing, it's amateurish. And then when you turn it on Jeffrey Goldberg in The Atlantic, it's like, hey, look over there. This is what happens. Donald Trump and Caroline Leavitt, they're reading from the same hymn book. When asked about this thing, this is what they both said.
But that's an app that a lot of people use. And somebody got on. I mean, happened to know the guy's a total sleazebag. The Atlantic is a failed magazine. Does very, very poorly. Nobody gives a damn about it. This gives it a little bit of a shot. And I will tell you this: that they've made up more stories, and they're just a failing magazine.
They are good at fear-mongering the American public, but not anymore. I think the Americans see the truth. They see past the sensationalist headlines from Jeffrey Goldberg in The Atlantic, which is a dying magazine.
No, it's not. Jesus Christ, guys. If you're going to lie about shit, make it believable. I mean, like, if you're in the media business, unfortunately I am, and the one thing you want to be is The Atlantic. You don't maybe not like their editorial positions, but this is a news story that didn't print out very well, by the way. We have a bad printer here. But The Atlantic is from CNN, so dismiss it as fake news because you can't believe anything anymore. Just go, it's Breitbart only. The Atlantic is expanding its print magazine as it surpasses 1 million subscribers. It's not failing. And in this world of media, 1 million paid subscribers is outrageous. It is unbelievable. And whatever you think of Jeff Goldberg, he's done an amazing job with the magazine. All right, that's my bitching about how ridiculous they handled this in the media. But there's the other issues. The biggest issue being classified information. What were they doing? Did this screw anything up? Should people get fired? So who's the best person to talk to me about this? Former Republican congressman, was in the military, served abroad, and I want to have someone else intro this guy. Can we get another person to intro him for me, and then I'll pick it up from here?
A guy who spells his name M-E-I-J-E-R, but they pronounce it Meyer. The hell kind of a spelling is that? Meijer. It's Meijer, but it's actually pronounced Meyer. I said, how the hell do you pronounce this guy's name?
It's Dutch. It's a Dutch name. Peter Meijer, former congressman from, what are you, Peter, the 2nd district in Michigan? Peter made the brave decision to vote for impeachment, and that was Donald Trump at a rally, ginning up the person who primaried him, who beat Peter in the primary and then naturally lost in the general election, which Peter could have won. Peter Meijer, thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure. It's weird to do a podcast with you or to do anything with you in daylight hours, Mike.
Yeah, I know. I just woke up about 25 minutes ago, so I'm a bit sluggish. That's the reason. What do you think of this? You've had security clearances, you've been in Congress, you've hopped into SCIFs before. People know what SCIFs are, where you get to look at all the good stuff, and it's not on apps that you can download from the App Store. I mean, tell me what your general sense of this stuff is. I saw a headline in The Hill today that there are a lot of Republicans that are pretty pissed off about this. I don't know if you're talking to anyone on The Hill, about this particular issue, but God damn, this story, it keeps going.
Well, and I saw somebody in the chat being like, "Oh, did you see the Mike Waltz's Venmo contacts, which were public for a little bit of time? Not transactions, just 300 people from his contact list that
Yeah.
if you went, then I'm sure was uploaded to Venmo like 10 years ago."
Yeah.
But in my mind, there's two things that should not have happened. Two mistakes. I mean, one was obviously the addition of Jeffrey Goldberg to the chat, and the other
Bit of a
was
mistake.
sharing information in that chat that that now is not relevant, but because it was prior to action being undertaken, it had times when things were taking off. It was general, but that's still something that'd be considered very sensitive, and that wouldn't want to be made public. Now, again, with time, all of that becomes clearly evident because it's in the news. It's clear when a plane has taken off. It's clear when a bomb was dropped. But I mean, the whole thing about the conspiracy, like, it's not a mystery at all. Signal, for those who have it, you can have a username in Signal that doesn't necessarily correlate with how your name is saved in the contact list.
Mm-hmm.
Jeffrey Goldberg was JG on Signal. The speculation is that Mike Waltz was trying to add Jameson Greer, the U.S. trade representative, who's part of the National Security Council, and that.
Is that? I've been trying to figure out who that was, because just as in JG, I was like, well, who could that be? And it's Jeffrey. I thought they put it in a Jeffrey Goldberg, like Jewish guy. I thought that's what that they were doing from Mike Waltz. But that's who it appears to be. That there was actually just, I mean, because that makes it much more obvious that it's a dumb mistake, right?
100%. Right. I mean, no big conspiracy. Now, was Jeffrey Goldberg being incredibly nefarious and putting his initials as JG and Signal on the off chance that somebody thinks he's U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer? Probably.
I mean, honestly, that would be so awesome if he was that clever.
Actually, now I'm curious who. But I mean, I use Signal. There's a lot of people in my Signal contacts that are literally just a single initial, which can be ungodly confusing. So please don't do that. If you're a Signal user. But again, that is totally, that's a mistake. That's obviously embarrassing. I don't know how Jameson Greer is on Signal. There's a chance that he also used JG and it just selected the wrong JG and didn't go back and look in the contacts and verify the last four of the email of the person's
but also,
cell phone.
Peter, they shouldn't be using Signal. I mean, and again, this isn't me being some weepy lefty here. I mean, Andy McCarthy over at National Review, I saw him had a piece today, like, just, you guys shouldn't be using Signal, was something, the headline was something like that. Guys, stop using Signal. I mean, that's secure for the average person, but kind of compromised for other people. There was some reporting, which Steve Witkoff denied, that he was using Signal in Russia. I mean, when I was in Russia in 2018, I was advised as a journalist that literally no one gives a shit about to have a burner phone when I was there. Yeah. And that's like and that's pretty reckless, right?
Yeah, Caroline Leavitt from the White House, and again, take this for what it's worth, but she said that Witkoff, while he was added to the chat while he was in Moscow, he didn't have his personal phone with him. They gave him, to your point, a burner phone to use while he was over there. Yeah. But I mean, that's probably why the story is living, is additional details unfold or suspicion of additional complications. That's like, if he was added while he was there, his phone could have been compromised. I mean, that's really the weakness of Signal, or really of anything. And we can go back to Salt Typhoon, the massive, hack that, certainly would be targeting individuals like those who are on the Signal chat, the extent to which that Salt Typhoon could actually read messages versus just getting the metadata, being able to listen in on phone calls. There's still the encrypted element that, as long as that individual's phone is not compromised, Salt Typhoon was compromising the cellular systems using the same backdoor that our intelligence agencies use. Shockingly, when you create a backdoor, somebody else can use it. So but it's not at all. I mean, I think that government officials should be communicating more robustly. And my God, like the Biden administration, I don't even think they communicated really in meetings. It was all interagency. It was very kind of stuffy, to the point where, I didn't get a sense that sort of the left hand knew what the right hand was doing, or that there was a lot of that coordination, except through maybe the chief of staff. And so things get very stovepiped. You don't get folks sharing across. That is not an excuse for putting anything that is that sensitive into a Signal chat at all.
Yeah.
I mean, if you strip out the timing details, the attack details that was sent in the group chat, but everything else in there was actually a pretty interesting and nuanced
It
kind of back and
was,
forth
right?
with folks.
There was an interesting
and
conversation there, right?
That
Particularly
was
about
pretty,
Europe. Yeah.
Yeah, that was in line with a lot of public-facing statements. Now, an intelligence agency would want to gain access to that type of internal insight, but again, if the internal insight is the same as your external insight, the additive value is pretty negligible. Similarly, so yeah, if they had accidentally added somebody from the Ministry of State Security on the Chinese side, and that information had been shared with the Houthis, the biggest risk probably would have been that the target, they would have assumed who the target was because the target was not identified in the text just as target, that target could have moved. So we're coming off of years of classified document scandals, of Hillary's emails, of all of this type of stuff. And so the amount of, the hypocrisy isn't as beautiful as it was between sort of the Trump and Biden classified documents, because it was like, well, if I had done what this guy had done, it's like, no, you did. We're finding it. Like, information security is hard. It's not perfect. Like, you can maintain perfect information security, and that can ultimately defeat the whole reason why you want to maintain that, if it prevents folks from actually getting their jobs done, from communicating, from sharing information. Like, there is a very real tension there that is incredibly hard to reconcile, and it gets the most attention, at the National Security Council, at the top level. But this is something that bedevils folks in war zones all the time, especially when you're working with partnered forces, that something may be classified, but hey, we got information there's a bomb over here. Well, I need these guys to go defuse the bomb, but has the location of that bomb been declassified? Do we understand how that came about? Like, there can be very real tensions, and there have been times in the past where kind of tactical level, military folks have said, to hell with it. Like, I need to get this job done, and intentionally shared information that was, classified at a low level.
And this happened to you when you were in Afghanistan, or?
No. Well, when I was in Iraq, I had, this is a very, very valuable lesson when you send somebody an email and then they give you a phone call, and then you send them an email and they get you back on the phone. It's like, you don't want the paper trail. I was asked to declassify something, and I was like, well, sure. Like, if you're requesting this, and the officer kept just calling me back and not replying to my email and giving me a way of covering my ass. And so I politely forgot about that request, but also, like, we overclassify. There's a lot of things that you mentioned, these skiff briefings. My God, the amount of skiff briefings I went in where I'm like, why do we go through this whole rigmarole if you're telling me everything that I could have read in the New York Times? Yeah. But just because it's in the New York Times doesn't mean it's not classified, right? Or a handful of occasions where, it was clear the classified information was dated, especially around the Afghanistan collapse. I had conversations with people that I knew over there it was clear to me that I was getting, briefed on information that was a result of a phone call or a meeting with the same person that I talked to the day before, but that information was what they had relayed, a week or two prior, right? So it's not like we're all getting the UFO report and who killed JFK, right? It's really
again,
mundane.
it was Oswald. So don't introduce that, Peter. I hate to be the person that disappoints
Listen,
everyone.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I really think that
somebody hacked your phone. No, what do you make of? Because I look at this, and I'm kind of annoyed by it, slightly outraged by certain elements of it, right? Particularly the response. I don't like people in my government coming in front of me and treating me like I'm a complete moron, and lying to me and saying, I think Jeffrey Goldberg infused this into this chat, which is like, guys, come on, you cannot come up with something better than that. In this ever-shifting story, it's not true. It is true, but it doesn't matter. It's classified, but it's not really classified because it doesn't matter. But so every minute, that shifting story, there's a certain amateurishness to it. But when I look at the actual stuff, yes, that should not be out there. Yes, it should not be in the hands of a journalist if you're trying to, from a military perspective, from an OPSEC perspective. But then when I look at it, it's like, is it something that is going to have profound impact on much of anything in a week or a month or a year? I don't think so. I mean, the European element, that's pretty interesting. This kind of protection racket that J.D. Vance is like, if we're doing this and most of the shipping that's coming through the Suez Canal is European and not ours, we should make them pay for it. That's very friendly of us. But yeah, that's an interesting insight. But as far as that, I don't. Well, I'll give you one example of this, and listeners, viewers can go onto, what is today? So they get the date right. This 27th. There's a show on NPR. I was driving today and sitting in traffic, and the worst than the traffic was actually listening to the show, and it was called The Forum. And I didn't realize that the stuff that I had just been watching on Fox News, where I thought everyone was being ridiculous, the sky is falling stuff on NPR was astonishing. Like this, a journalist on there said, there's 1,000 times worse than Hillary's emails, et cetera. I mean, when you look at this as far as the long-term repercussions, am I wrong in thinking that not much here? Am I being too nice to them?
I mean, it was always hard to guess what are the stories that people will remember a month from now, a year from now, and what will just be eclipsed by the latest thing. And especially when Donald Trump is president, like he thrives off of, I mean, that's basically what Canada is, right? Every time he wants to deflect, to clog the pores, to flood the zone with something different, he just starts beating up on Canada, and Canada, is beat up onable as South Park, has evidenced over the past 30 years. But I think that it'll certainly be remembered as a misstep, as something that was, that was embarrassing, that shouldn't have happened. I don't think it'll have world-rending implications, right? If there had been the names of undercover agents or things that were like, wow, like not the fact that they were disclosed and their continued disclosure, right? Like in this case, what was disclosed was incredibly sensitive and could have had damage, had it been had that been shared publicly within the 2 hours, since it was posted. Now it can be shared publicly and there's absolutely no implication apart from the politics of it.
So what do you make of all this, just from the perspective of somebody who was in Congress? Do you want to be back in Congress, by the way, Peter? Would you wish you were there right now?
I'd say for every time I'm like, man, I wish I was there. I have at least a dozen times where I'm like, man, I'm glad I'm not there. So it's a balance. It's obviously an honor to serve. But
when somebody says it's an honor to serve, it means they don't want to ever do it again. But how do you grade on a foreign policy level? Because I mean, you're obviously with your military experience, and you've traveled even after being boots on the ground as a soldier to Afghanistan and Iraq. How would you judge the foreign policy element of the Trump administration thus far? I think that domestically things have been much more chaotic. And, if you include Greenland and the Panama Canal and Canada, the chaos comes to foreign policy too. But when it comes to sort of serious stuff, Ukraine, Middle East, China, there's two B-2 bombers in Diego Garcia. I was going to say Diego Rivera, but that was wrong. And that's to scare the Iranians. They're this idea that they're very close to getting a nuclear bomb, et cetera. So what do you make of how they've performed and acquitted themselves so far?
I want to set Ukraine aside because
that's
I feel like we're only getting, we're kind of only getting half the conversation. I'm sort of incredibly depressed by some of the rhetoric. If that's meant to basically say, to kind of prove to Putin, to his voters, like Ukraine has gone as far as they possibly can. Now the ball's in Russia's court. Then he, if he holds Putin's feet to the fire equally as he did Zelensky, then I'll change my tune. But setting that one aside, I have tremendous criticism of the Biden administration. They did smart things, especially around the Indo-Pacific, and Trump has been a very seamless continuation, I would say, of a lot of the smart things, on a one-off basis that the Biden administration was doing. Where he has been far more helpful and where I was actually kind of surprised at the excitement I was hearing from folks abroad when Trump was elected, is that he's not afraid to be speaking loudly, swinging a big stick, with the implication in the sort of overt communication, I should say, that he does not want to get into unnecessary conflicts, right? So do not make him do the thing that you are now making him do. There's a very sort of amateurish schoolyard dynamic to a lot of foreign policy and international affairs, that is in stark contrast with kind of stuffy conferences and the way a lot of bureaucrats handle things. And Trump is far less hidebound in ways that I think excite potential allies or folks who are allies, that they kind of know what to do to make Trump happy.
Yeah.
And so it's not like this opaque cipher. And at the same time, on the adversary side, just because they're an enemy doesn't mean they have to be an enemy. There's a way to get on Trump's good side, and there's a way to get on his bad side. And I think that clarity, even though it's centered in individual, can actually have perversely really good outcomes. Adding on to the Ukraine, the tariffs are another thing where I am just bewildered and confused.
Today,
and I don't see how it's part of it.
And you're in Michigan.
No.
It's supposed to benefit the people of Michigan. The American car companies are going to be just selling twice as much now because of a 25% tariff on all cars coming to the United States, which, by the way, and ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, you know this. I'm not going to condescend to you about this. It's very hard to identify what is an American car, right? There are cars that are made in Tennessee that are Volkswagen cars. They're made by American workers. There are American cars that are made in Mexico. There are American cars that are made in the United States that are full of foreign parts. This is not a very simple thing. So yes, the tariff element of this, which is driving me crazy today, is a difficult thing when it comes to foreign policy. I know that the Trump administration thinks they're wielding those in a clever way to get people to say uncle and get people to act in all sorts of manners because of the threat of tariffs. I don't buy that. Do you?
I mean, that's what I don't get. And again, getting back to Canada, it's like, I can't see the end game here. There's a lot of places where it's very clear, and tariffs as a tactic, to assist in negotiations, I could be totally sold onto, to think about our foreign policy, not just from a military and security standpoint, but to also have an economic component. I mean, there's a lot of there's a solid, intelligent argument to be made there, and that can form the basis of very rational policy. But yeah, I'm just confused, especially like the USMCA that he negotiated.
Yeah, that's a weird one.
Yeah, I can't offer any insight. I'm just
opposed to my
own
tariff policy. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the one thing that is overlooked, my friend Eli Lake, I think Eli Lake, who's a great national security journalist, wrote something about this over at the Free Press, but it's been kind of overlooked is kind of the J.D. Vance element of this. Not a leak, this mistake, let's just say, call it a mistake, and say the conspiracy theorists are wrong and say that it is actually a mistake. But the J.D. Vance element of this is that this is the thing that people who are just casual observers are not paying too much attention to, is that is a wing of the Republican Party when it comes to foreign policy that really doesn't like people like Mike Waltz, does not like people like Pete Hegseth, who, aren't neocons in any sense. I mean, they're much more towards that old isolationist type of conservatism than any people in that position would have been 10, 15 years ago. But there is kind of a fight within the party. I mean, I said the other day to a friend that this will end with what happened to Ukraine and Republicans loathing Ukraine, happening to Israel too. Because that is the kind of drift of the party in the Bannon way. And I know that there's a lot of tumult within the party about trying to get rid of these people. They're too eager for military action. I mean, J.D. Vance's message was maybe we shouldn't do this. Second guessing the commander-in-chief. It was in private, but maybe we shouldn't do this. Maybe we should wait 30 days. Do you think that Donald Trump will kind of hand over foreign policy to that type of person? Or is it pretty... Does he have this in a team of rivals way where he appoints people, the John Boltons of the world, the H.R. McMasters of the world, who are a little more I don't want to say militaristic, but more willing to use American power.
I mean, I think one of the biggest differences between his first and second administration, is that I think Trump feels a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more confident on the foreign policy side because, frankly, he's not coming into office like a first-term president, and there was a very big learning curve in the first administration. But even out of office, even the campaign he was running, it was as if he was the incumbent president.
Yeah.
The way that foreign leaders react to him isn't like who's this guy we need to get to know, right? So that was a lot more relative. I mean, seamless because it was full of seams the first time around and incredibly ramshackle. But you're hitting upon a very real trend, though. I think it's understood a lot closer what Trump wants among his team in ways that I think that the John Boltons of the world didn't really understand that and thought that he was more of a blank slate upon which they could project, what they thought should happen. Now, that's not to say Trump has made up his mind on something, but the sort of parameters, the Overton window is a little bit narrower, in terms of what Trump will accept, and it's not just throw it all at the wall. And yet within that, there's still this sort of concern among some folks on the right and in kind of the extended MAGA universe, that the neocon enemies have infiltrated, that no matter what Mike Waltz does or says or acts, a couple of years ago, he was anti-Trump or he was a neocon, or we think that he's, too far on the interventionist side. And so you saw a lot of folks kind of in those corners braying for accountability and heads must roll. And it's like, well, you're only saying that because the head that you think will roll is the one that you want to roll, right? Yeah. This is, there's, never let a crisis go to waste and never let an opportunity, to increase your factions, relative power against what you view as your ideological opposites. Never let that go to waste either.
Well, let's go to somebody who's, I wouldn't say my ideological opposite. I like some of his stuff and I disagree with some of it too, but a very clever guy. And if Peter, you can stick around and we can all chat until the end of the hour. But Ken Klippenstein is, the guy has what, 500 million followers on Twitter. I look at his stuff and I just get super jealous because he has KenKlippenstein.com, which is his Substack, which has, I think, 40 million subscribers. And Ken, who is a smart guy, and if we have a mutual friend in Lee Fong. I've seen his byline with Lee Fong when Ken was over at The Intercept and The Nation. Ken, thanks for coming on. And I just wanted to ask you wrote a piece pretty critical of Jeff Goldberg right when this came out. I mean, everyone was backslapping him and high-fiving him and saying, you were smart about not putting intelligence assets in there and targeting, et cetera. And, I clicked over to Ken Klippenstein and he was not having it. Ken, what was your argument? And obviously he did release that stuff later. So how does that affect your initial argument?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. I'd say that looking at Goldberg's conduct during it, I was surprised that he focused his concern so much on national security rather than the public interest. I mean, we are not counterintelligence officers. Journalists are not supposed to be. That's not to say that you don't want to think about how something that you write is going to affect the country. That that falls within the, I think, purview of the public interest. But when I saw all of the hand-wringing about how will this affect statecraft and things, I thought, when did the media adopt this as their primary concern? Mm-hmm. I mean, he should look at it, determine for himself, maybe even consider what the what the administration's case is. But what he did instead was the first story I felt kind of infantilized by the way in which it, focused on emojis and sort of funny stuff that is like, obviously going to generate a response that's kind of like, oh, look how unprofessional these guys are that they use emojis. I mean, I don't really care. I use emojis. I feel like everybody under age 40 does. But I would have liked to see the stuff that he ended up publishing subsequently, which I think he should have published in the first place. That's when I wrote that story before he published the rest of the text materials, because the operation had already been conducted. And so I thought, well, what is the concern here? I
have to say that I thought when it was published, because of the concerns, I thought it was going to be much more specific. And I'd be interested to see him questioned on that there were, specific names and targets. And maybe when he released everything, he didn't actually release everything. I have no idea. But, to your point, and, Ken, and I know your politics, and I'm going to try to give you something that's not really a question, but a statement that I think you'll probably agree with, and then I can try to disagree with you. But it's kind of interesting, the emoji conversation, when we should probably be having a conversation about the military strikes in Yemen. I mean, we've been doing this before, and we've become so inured to it, and just understand that this is something we do and something we have to do. A conversation about that would probably be a little more interesting to me, but that's just me.
Yeah, I could agree more. And if you look at the initial reporting, when the first tranche of texts was published, The Atlantic, they kind of tried to play it off and say, oh, Trump is just doing the same stuff Biden has done. I pay very close attention to what the CENTCOM area, what is going on in CENTCOM, the Middle East area of responsibility for the U.S. military. And there's a big difference between the strikes that they conducted. And I'm not saying necessarily that the strikes are, a good policy or a bad policy. I mean, we'll see what happens. But they targeted leadership elements within the Houthi, rebel government. And in addition to that, command and control facilities, which is very different than what the Biden administration had done. They were targeting logistics, things like that. I mean, that's a stark difference and something that I think should generate some amount of debate. And, we got, more visibility into what that looks like in terms of the allusions to targeting and things in these stories, but there's hardly any interest in it. The overwhelming interest is in, were they in compliance with classification law, which, by the way, I think people are going to be disappointed when they see how much power is concentrated in the executive branch in terms of what they're able to declassify. If you look at people like Hegseth and the National Security Advisor and Gabbard, a lot of people involved in this are what's called original classification authorities, meaning that they are able to more or less at will classify or declassify whatever they think is in the national security interest to do so. And legally, that authority flows from the president, who grants a number of these. It's called original classification authorities. So they have a lot of power. I'm not saying that what they did was responsible. I think it was reckless. But if you're going to approach this from the point of view of, did they break the rules? You're going to find that the executive has a lot of power when it comes to the rules governing classification. So I think that that's not a good way. To me, the scandal wasn't just that the media didn't talk about what the basic substance of the story was. It's that if they're having these text messages, and I think any other reporter, I lived in Washington for several years, we talked to officials, they're all on Signal, and none of that stuff is getting memorialized in the historical records so that we can understand what our government was doing 20 years from now or 30 years from now, or whatever the time period is that they release these things to the National Archives or the presidential libraries. And to me, that was what upset me more than anything, because when I file a Freedom of Information Act request to get documents back to the government, you bet that they're going to worry about all of the classification rules, and they're going to black out half the thing if you even get it back, or if you do get it back, maybe you're getting it back years later. So there's a two-tiered system where if the public wants to know what the government is up to, they come to it like it's James Jesus Angleton, like some paranoid counterintelligence officer worrying about what are the Russians going to get. And then these guys are just letting their ass hang out, texting all this stuff to each other. And it's like, well, why do we have this two-tiered system? Like,
yeah, I mean, that's it precipitating another conversation. Look, I mean, there was a lot of stuff I wasn't very excited about on January 20th. But one of the things that I was like, hey, I can get behind this, because to listeners of the other show that I do, I've for many, many years, I don't know how many copies of my namesake, Daniel Patrick Moynihan's book, Secrecy, I've sold. But it's a great book published by Yale University Press about overclassification, how the government has become more and more secretive over time. So I was happy when you see, all these dopes thinking they're going to figure out, who really killed Kennedy. But no, the excitement is the fact that it's contextualizing things and they're releasing documents. But of course, that is from 60 years ago, and no governments in their current form are ever going to do that. And look, you said something about, what I think is it's appropriate to call the imperial presidency, all the power that has been accrued in the presidency. And this is a bipartisan thing. I think it really kind of started with George Bush, and then Barack Obama took it, and everyone has done it since, and all of that thing. And remember Donald Trump during the documents case, and he wasn't totally wrong, by the way, when he said, I can say if something's classified or unclassified. I have that majestic power, and that's not wrong. He can actually do that. But so let me ask you a question about the initial instinct you had in that piece, which I understand. And by the way, all journalists should sort of instinctively be on that side. More information is always better. And those, I had a friend who's a prominent person who tweeted something like, the second he found out that I was on this chat, he should have said sorry and gotten off of it. That's insane to me. That's a completely nutty thing to say. But what is the limit? I mean, I believe that there are limits to this, obviously. But what is the limit if you're getting that material and say, there's a CIA asset by name mentioned that might be on the ground in Yemen? I mean, there's been a lot of controversy in this stuff with WikiLeaks, et cetera, and Julian Assange supposedly saying, I don't know if this has actually ever been sourced, that they collaborated with the Afghans, so screw them. What is your attitude about that kind of stuff? Do you have a limit?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not an absolutist. I just think that limit should be determined by the press and not deferred to by the government, as Goldberg has very clearly said. He said, it's very clear that he waited he's getting all these accolades for publishing the documents after, under oath, the CIA director and director of national intelligence said that they weren't classified. I look at that and I say, so he basically wanted the White House's permission to publish documents about the White House. Does anyone see the problem with that? I don't think they should be making that determination. I'm not saying that he shouldn't consider some of the same things that the White House would be considering, but we have to have an adversarial relationship with the government in the same way that a public defender in court does. You have to be representing your client. And to my view, the media's client is the public. It is not the federal government. And again, that's not to say that you can't make considerations about how something you publish can affect the country. Because to take the example that you made, if there's a clandestine officer on the ground and you name him, that person's killed, it not only obviously hurts that person, it hurts the U.S. government's ability to pitch sources and have people help inform our intelligence apparatus in the future. That hurts the public. That's a sort of public consideration. But that is something that you can do yourself. And I don't think that you should. I mean, the White House is an interested party in all of this. So I've had the experience very clearly. I talked about the FOIA cases that I've had up to and including litigation, and they go way beyond what's necessary. I mean, you just mentioned the Kennedy files. We just got back a letter from a senior assistant to JFK describing things that should have been declassified decades ago. And so it's like clear, even if something 50 years ago, they're being too aggressive with secrecy about. Do you think they're going to be secretive about something happening now while they're still in office? Of course they are. So it's not safe to trust them to make those determinations. Those are determinations that are properly made by the media institutions, I think.
Ken, you're disappointing me. I was hoping that we'd get to yell at each other or something if we disagree, but I don't hear. Can we, Jason, producer Jason, is it possible to get Representative Meijer back? Is he around? Is he still with us? Because I want to ask Peter about this. Peter Meijer, a former congressman from Michigan who served in both Iraq and Afghanistan, but at the same time, and I'm not going to attribute politics to Peter, but he's got a bit of a libertarian streak to him. So I don't know if we can grab Peter to see if he wants to dispute anything that Ken said. Peter, you there? No. This is like talk radio from the caller. Are you there?
Okay. No.
There you go. There's
I was furiously trying to unmute.
I thought you were saying you were furious with Ken. What do you make of that argument? I mean, Ken was pretty straightforward at the beginning. Like, it should all be released. Don't wait for the approval.
No,
of
I didn't say
House.
that. I said the determination should be made by him. There was one case that there was a member of the CIA.
Correct.
And I think that's something worth considering. But as to the rest of it, this is all ex post facto.
Yeah.
And the targeting stuff was initially described as way more granular than I think it turned out being. Again, I think this was reckless and crazy. I'm not defending that this happened.
No.
I'm just saying.
When I say you say it should all be released, that is with what you saw afterwards. I mean, seeing what they actually ended up publishing, with of course, the exception of the clandestine officer, the CIA officer. But so to make sure that I'm characterizing your view right, what do you think, Peter?
I mean, I think the journalist is under no, Jeffrey Goldberg in this case, under no legal obligation, to to not disseminate. I mean, it's really just a moral question. Is the newsworthiness of the information being disseminated, superior to whatever potential risks or secondary consequences could be had? That's, again, getting back to your initial analogy about Julian Assange, and just, the difference between that, versus, the way that the other NSA hacker,
you say Ken is
Snowden?
Edward Snowden, the way that, the documents that he had, now I'm sure Russia has them in their entirety, but at least initially that was gone through a smaller network that would try to, again, maximize the newsworthiness, minimize sort of the collateral impact that could be had. I think that's right. I mean, I don't think Jeffrey Goldberg did anything wrong. I'm kind of surprised that he left the chat. I mean, Ken, I think it's a minor disagreement on whether or not he should have front loaded, some of that information from a newsworthiness standpoint and keeping it in the headlines. He probably played it right in terms of saying, there's classified information that I'm not going to disclose for national security reasons. And I'd be like, whether or not that was played up or not, it certainly helped to drive the narrative forward, and while at the same time giving him, plausible moral cover. Though,
yeah, I guess I want to ask him, if I have the opportunity, if there is stuff that he's still holding back, because I mean, look, Ken's point is right. The idea that it was much more granular, that there was going to be coordinates and names of people who were going to be hit, and what street a building was on. I mean, even that, in a post-operation way, isn't that secret, right? It's not necessary to hold that stuff back. But Ken,
it's pretty obvious where you dropped the bomb.
Yeah, that one can be, well, it's not so obvious in Yemen that there's like no journalists on the ground in determining who got killed, if there were civilian casualties, et cetera, is nearly impossible, and we have to take their word for it. Ken, what would you say is an example, if you have one, that has happened in the past where a journalist, either rightly held something back or should have actually held something back and said, oh, actually, that was damaging to American national security? Are there any examples of that stick out in your head?
Well, in the case of Phil Agee, he just released all of these clandestine agents' names, and that can lead to people getting killed. I think that's pretty clearly, I mean, I agree with Peter. This is not a legal well, in that case, it's a legal consideration because there are laws preventing you from, naming clandestine officers. But I think this is a moral decision. So there's not always a clear line. But again, the question to me is, who is making that determination? And in this case, he waited until the CIA and the DNI said, oh, it's unclassified. What's creepy, frankly, to me about that is that classification is a system that governs people in government working for the intelligence community. That is not a system that governs the general public. I did not sign a non-disclosure agreement. I do not work for the government. Again, there are moral considerations for sure. I'm not an absolutist on this question, but that's a completely different framework than how we're discussing this, which is a classification system which doesn't apply to any of the civilian world that does not work for the intelligence community. So, and that they think that they operate under it is, I think, an indication of how close the media is to the government. And I hope I'm not going to break anyone's heart here, but they have to develop a relationship with the government to be able to enjoy access and get exclusives and things. And when you bite the hand that feeds you, that gets withdrawn and you stop getting those. And what that all, I think, culminates in is a system we're seeing now in which you have Brian Stelter going on CNN saying it's patriotic that this person, didn't publish any of these things. And then the whole media just listens to that and says, yeah, that's great, because you should do what the government wants. Yeah, I don't think that's a healthy place for the press to be.
No, it's also not patriotic. I mean, it can be sensible. If you're saying that I have a bunch of CIA assets here, and it doesn't inform the general public in any way differently than if I'd left them out. But the idea that it requires a heavy dose of patriotism, like you're in a Lee Greenwood song or something, is ridiculous. And I have to say that making a lot of sense, Ken, and you sound. It's really funny that I referenced him already in this episode. My hawkish, neoconish friend Eli Lake, who in this business for so long, often now sounds like he should be writing for The Intercept, because he's gone through this stuff in too much secrecy. He's done really interesting podcasts about it too. All right, if you guys have just a few minutes, we're going to grab a couple of people. We want to talk to some of some of the baying mob out there who will maybe be a little more angry and aggressive than I've been today? Because I'm happy. We got somebody in Houston? Oh, goodness. All right. Is that the name Houston, or are you in Houston?
No, that's my first name.
Your
that's
first
my first name. Actually, my middle name, but it's what I go by. Yeah.
But you also sound like you're from Houston.
Well, I did go to University of Texas, but
all right.
All
right. Well, ask us a very smart question, because you look like you're ensconced in a hall of degrees, and it looks like you're a very learned man. So what do you got for us?
And in my office, I'm just a lawyer, and I don't know nothing. But I thought I'd ask. Now that I got some smart people to talk to. It really kind of feels like we're the tectonic plates of geopolitics are shifting right now in the world, and we've got a former member of Congress on who's served in the armed forces, and I'd like to, get some ideas about sort of what y'all think U.S. grand strategy is going forward. It's maybe it's a broad question, but it seems like Trump is going to be yet another president who is trying to sort of reset relations with Russia so we can pivot to Asia. Obama certainly, vocally tried to do that. George Bush was, I think, trying to do that before 9/11 happened and got sidetracked. I've watched a fair amount of like Bridge Colby's his Senate confirmation hearings, and I've listened to a lot of his talk, because he seems to be sort of the most sort of serious person. And I think, he's not just a pure isolationist. He's got a sort of strategy, and is going to be in charge of setting our strategy going forward, or at least for this term. But
but he trends in that direction for sure. Yeah, he trends in that.
He says we can't afford to be the global hegemon. We can't fight two wars on two fronts anymore. And I just don't know what, there was a great podcast I'd commend everyone on, the Free Press did, I think a year or two ago, between him and Bret Stephens, sort of giving a very sort of both ends. And they both make great points. And I like hearing both of them. But what do y'all think about our chance, or where are we now? Do we have the capacity to continue as we are? Or do we have no choice but to sort of, try to make peace with Russia? Morals.
Peter, let me throw that to you, Peter, because it kind of comes to what I was saying before, of like this kind of factionalism when you have more traditional hawkish Republicans and more kind of slightly more Taftian isolationist Republicans out there. And by the way, to your point, George Bush in 2000 ran on a Bring America Home platform, and then 9/11 happened. So, Peter, what do you make of it? Where are we in the grand scheme of things in foreign policy?
Yeah, there's obviously dispute around sort of the micro or the regional dynamics, right? So are you for supporting Ukraine? Are you against supporting Ukraine? There's really no daylight, though, and I think this both unites all parties, all factions, in anything we can do to deter a potential conflict with China, we should be doing. Right? And on the Trump administration side, they view that as, what can we do to drive a wedge between Russia and China, because those two countries, got closer together over the course of the Russian isolation post the Ukrainian invasion. So anything to try to effectuate that split will weaken China, at least in the sense of their own belief that they can prevail in a conflict with the U.S. or with the West, and that whether or not we're supporting Ukraine, the outcome of that conflict has a sincere human impact on folks who are in Ukraine, without a doubt. It will not change the course of world history or rise to the level of a potential nuclear exchange in the way that a U.S.-China conflict would be absolutely catastrophic. Yeah. And I think that's what is sort of not said in the undertone. So those the B-2 bombers and Diego Garcia, the missile sites that just came online in the Philippines, right? You want to not antagonize, but also not give a potential adversary the confidence that they can roll over, that they will be able to roll easily and achieve a victory at a price that is satisfactory to them or worth paying. And so from a grand strategy standpoint, I mean, I think that's it.
Ken, let me throw this to you quickly before I go to Lucas. But, you know, I interviewed, you used to be at The Nation magazine. I interviewed Stephen Cohen one time, really interesting, smart Sovietologist who I disagreed with a lot in our conversation. But it was early on in the Trump's first term. And I don't know, because he sadly passed away, I don't know where he was before he passed. But at that point, he was sort of guardedly optimistic about a Trump foreign policy that wasn't going to be Chomskyite, but it was more in line what he thought where America should be as a man of the left. What do you make of it, the second time around?
It's quite different from the first time. I just read the Director of National Intelligence put out the intelligence communities. It's called the Annual Threat Assessment, which kind of summarizes what they perceive to be the global threats, not just foreign nation states, but non-state actors and even things domestically. And what was striking to me about it, and differed greatly from the first administration, was it took pains to note the specific actions undertaken by Iran, Russia, North Korea, and China, all these historical, bugaboos of the U.S. It took pains to note the steps they're taking to avoid full-scale conflict with America. And I think that what that suggests is that the rhetoric that he has used, that I don't think was realized in the first administration, about pursuing this realist policy of prioritizing what are the main concerns and bringing the focus back home. I think that for better or worse, that's true of at least. I encourage everyone to read that. It's a public document. Congress just had a hearing on it in both the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, in which they echoed this view that, yes, the Iranians have enriched uranium. No, the Ayatollah has not made the decision to go ahead and create them. I think there's often a lot of confusion about those two things. They do have a nuclear program. They are clearly pursuing something, but that doesn't mean that they've made the ultimate decision to actually go ahead with the creation of one. And he talks if you look at China, the annual threat report talks about how we need to defeat them in the domain of economic competition, which sounds quite different than how the Biden administration used to talk about it. And then they led the threat report for the first time ever with discussion of what's called transnational criminal organizations, so like cartels. And so I think what you're seeing is more of a focus of the national security apparatus domestically, and I'm actually critical of this. So when you look at Trump's rhetoric and Attorney General Bondi's rhetoric and the FBI director's rhetoric on, say, what I consider vandalism against Tesla vehicles and what they call terrorism, actually creating a task force within the FBI to go after it. And you add to that the focus on these cartels operating within the U.S. and in southern border states. I think what you can piece together in all that is a sort of mosaic that shows us that he's really going to be more focused, or going to try to be more focused, on what he perceives to be national security threats in the continental United States, as opposed to these more historical adversaries. And you can make of that what you will, but it's certainly much different, I think, from the Biden administration and from his own first administration. And part of that might be that he's got a very different cabinet now.
Yeah, I mean, it could be right. At the same time, though, I would have been shocked in 2017 or 18 if I woke up and the United States bombed the Iranian nuclear facilities, and I don't think I'd be shocked. Now, let's go to one more. We have time for one more. We'll squeeze one more in. Lucas had his hand up, and he popped up, and we'll make sure Lucas gets his question. Lucas,
Hi,
are you there? How's it going, buddy?
Yeah, first I want to say hello again, Michael. I met you at the fifth column meet and greet back in the DNC. I was the one talking to you about Whitey Bulger and Southie.
Okay, that's we'll do a whole show on Whitey and white trash Boston that I come from. So what's your question, man?
So my question is for Peter. Peter, I'm from Chicago, and it seems like the Michigan GOP is like the Arizona GOP of the North, in which they just seem to plunder every single opportunity they've had for the last 15, 20 years, or at least since 2010. Do you see any bench or any hope to get things together? Because whether it's just dropping the ball between not getting enough signatures, candidates just not showing up. I mean, the only possible GOP candidate I can think in Michigan that might be competent, I think, is possibly Rick Grinnell if he wanted to run for Senate or governor. But I mean, I look at you and even you struggle to get in, and I'm not trying to bash Representative Rogers, but not a strong candidate, in my personal opinion, unlike the candidates that were run out in Ohio and Pennsylvania.
Peter, that's an amazing insult to the GOP. That it's like the Arizona GOP of the North, which is an insane asylum these days. What do you make of that question?
So, I mean, I'll say, like, generally speaking, the party in a particular state, the most visible construct of it is like the official party. An incredible state party can be marginally helpful. A atrocious state party can be marginally hurtful. The real game changer is how organized folks are. That sometimes happens within or adjacent to the parties, but oftentimes exists through other networks as well. So, from like a candidate focus and a recruitment standpoint, that's a little bit different. If we're going back, to 2010, I mean, we've had since 2010, there's been 2 terms of a Republican governor. Donald Trump won the state in 2016. He won it again in 2024. It's a purplish swing state that is following a lot of the trends nationally. And in midterms goes for the Democrats, in presidential years, goes for the Republicans. Mike Rogers, who I was briefly running against in the primary, he lost by 10,000 votes. I mean, that was an incredibly close race, and the closest Senate race that we've had in the state since 1996, I believe. So, I don't know that the narrative is as clean. I mean, I think both parties right now are struggling with what their future is going to look like. There's, obviously a lot of frustration on the left around Chuck Schumer and just what do Democrats stand for. On the right, the question of what comes after Donald Trump, because this will be his final term. He will not live forever. Who's going to kind of write that future, what it will look like. All of that is up in the air. So I think that uncertainty is certainly definitely reflected at the state level as well.
Ken, before we go out, can I ask you to give me a little prognostication on the Democratic Party? I mean, you see these Bernie AOC rallies, people getting fired up, but it seems to be a party adrift. What's your capsule version of what the future of the Democratic Party is either going to be or should be?
Not a very bright one in terms of their electoral prospects. I can tell you that, a lot of people my age are frustrated with, I think it would probably be described as a lack of fight. And I'm not someone that wants to see them reflexively opposing everything Trump does. Trump is the president of the country I live in. I want the country to succeed. But they are not articulating any sort of vision. Like, what do they stand? What is their thing? And this is not just my judgment. If you listen to what the minority leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries, and in the Senate, Schumer, say, they're literally just saying, okay, we're just going to wait for Trump to, hopefully hurt the economy, and then we'll pick up the pieces afterwards, and that's when we'll win. They have no short-term strategy in terms of articulating, here's what we would prefer to do instead. And if I pay attention to their interviews and statements very closely, and again, I'm not, a partisan person, like trying to just beat up on them. Their points are always, this is what Trump did that was bad. This is what Trump did that was bad. This is what Trump did that was bad. And it's like, okay, so what would you do differently? And then they're silent. They don't say anything. It's just, to the extent that they say anything, it's platitudes. So they're going to have to articulate something that creates a contrast so that people, because they did this exact same thing in 2016. They said, look how bad the other guy is. And how did that work out for them? Not very well, right?
No,
and it feels like they're doing the exact same thing now.
We know.
And I have to say, it's cynical to say, let's hope he destroys this economy with the tariffs and things. No, I don't want that to happen.
Yeah, I don't.
Like maybe I don't love Trump, but I want things to go well, regardless of who's in office.
I want to be wrong about tariffs, but I know that I'm not. So that is going to happen if he kind of goes forward with this incredibly foolhardy tariff plan. But Ken Klippenstein, next time you got to say we have to like requisition the grain, and you got to be like a real lefty to get me annoyed because you're too reasonable today. Go to his website, kenklippenstein.com. His Twitter feed is a monster of, I think, 500,000 followers when he's not getting banned by Elon, by the way. So
that's the thing. Talking about publishing stuff, I've actually been through this. I'm not just commenting academically, like, here's what I would do. I've actually been in these situations.
Yes, and Elon has banned you. But go check out his website. Go check out his Twitter feed, and we hope to have you back. And Congressman Peter Meijer, I'm still going to call you Congressman Peter Meijer, who, by the way, his hair is outrageous. It's like Lego hair. It's unbelievably thick. What has he been doing? Is it beta carotene when he's not on the Hill? Peter, your hair looks great. He might have gone already because he had to run to something. But thanks for coming, and thank you for joining us, Peter. And for all of you, we will be back on Tuesday with actor and former fat guy. I can say that. He's okay with that. Ethan Suplee will be here in studio with us to talk about Mallrats and American History X and how to lose that much weight, because I've been trying to lose 10 pounds and it's not working. So, and also thanks to our sponsor, FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. I always want to say education, who are defending everyone regardless of their political point of view. Go to thefire.org/Moynihan and sign up for their newsletter and give them some money too. So they'll come back and I don't know, give us some money. All right. See you guys on Tuesday.